Greetings, future First Communicants. It's Coach Nordland here, obviously, talking to you from our backyard. I hope you and your families are well during this virus lockdown. I hope you're studying hard and remembering to say your prayers too. Keep practicing your Our Father and your Hail Mary, your Glory Be, and don't forget about the act of contrition. Maybe we can practice together after Easter. I'm talking to you today because it's a very special feast for our church, but also for you. And I'll explain why in just a second. That's my sweetheart. All right. And the cat's lurking back there too. So I'll explain why in a second. But I want to go back about, 2 weeks ago when we last got together. Maybe it's 3 weeks ago now. And Bella asked a really great question. Do you remember? She asked, how did the disciples know that Jesus is God? And we talked about that in class, and we spoke about the number of ways, some of the predictions he made, some of the quotes that he made from the Old Testament that actually came true during his activity on earth, which is amazing. And also the transfiguration. Remember when Jesus was lifted off the ground and had visions of Elijah and Moses on either side of him, and the voice from the heavens, God the Father said, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased." So we have these incredible events happening, and then of course the amazing series of miracles. And at first the miracles were quite small, and Jesus was kind of shy. He didn't want to draw too much attention to them. But over time, the miracles got more and more spectacular, and Jesus kept dropping bigger and bigger hints that indeed he is God. And finally, about 10 days ago in the gospel, we hear about the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And the reason I'm telling you about this story is because it relates to where we're going on Holy Week, okay? So Jesus wants to go to Jerusalem. His disciples are kind of nervous about him going there because that's where the head of government was, and that's where some of the people who didn't like Jesus, that's where they were, and they were powerful people. But you know Jesus, he was fearless, and so he was off to Jerusalem with the disciples. On the way, he heard that his pal, Lazarus, had died, and so he wanted to pay a visit. And he went to visit the family, and he got there, and then he said, "I'm going to raise Lazarus from the dead." Well, firstly, no one's ever raised somebody else from the dead before, so that was a pretty audacious statement. But also, Lazarus' sister, Mary Bethany, she says, it's kind of funny, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Well, so it must have made a pretty ugly sight. But Jesus, he carried on doing what he set out to do, and he raised his hands and his eyes, and he said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here, I have said this aloud, that they may also believe in you and believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Well, you know what happened. Lazarus came out. It was another great miracle, maybe the greatest so far. And so the gospel carries on and says, "Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary," this is Mary Bethany, Lazarus' sister, "now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him." And so that kind of puts us in the world of 2,000 years ago. And more people started believing in Jesus. And so many people started gathering around him that he went into Jerusalem, and true to the scriptures that were 500, 600 years old, he went in on a donkey, and all the people applauded Jesus and welcomed him with open arms. And they did what they did back then. Instead of waving banners and tooting horns, they waved palms. That's how we get Palm Sunday. So that was only 4 days ago. But guess what? This is like a roller coaster this week. Spiritual highs from Palm Sunday, and then we'll do Holy Thursday, which I'll talk about in a second, and then we get into the passion and death of Christ. All right, and that's, of course, tomorrow. But today is Holy Thursday. And on Holy Thursday evening, Jesus gathered his disciples around and had a great event. And you know what that event is. I'll give you a hint. Do you remember the last time we got together, I think, we gathered in the church right below a big mosaic. It was a picture. What was the picture of? Do you remember? Yes, it had Jesus and all the apostles around a table. And around the table there was a loaf of bread and some fruit, some grapes, some wine. That was the Last Supper. And then we talked about that. And one of the things we figured out that the Last Supper was the very first of something. It was the first communion. That's right. So imagine yourselves as apostles receiving communion for the first time, right? And we know what was said at that table because it was recorded by Matthew, by Mark, and also by St. Paul and St. Luke. So think about that. 3 of the gospel writers and St. Paul all had virtually the same words, which went something along the lines of, because you hear this every Sunday at Mass, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in memory of me." And then Christ lifted up the cup and said, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." Well, we hear those words every single Mass. Think about that. Those words have been said for almost 2,000 years now. And today, around the world, it's phenomenal. So we celebrate this great feast today on Holy Thursday. Normally we'd have a Mass, a real important Mass, in the evening. But because the churches are closed due to the virus, we won't have Mass this evening except on the internet, which you can watch. But it's a great feast, and it's reminiscent of your first communion, which will be coming sooner or later. So I want you to be patient, keep saying your prayers, and think about the apostles around the table with Jesus. And then tomorrow will be Good Friday, and I'll try to send another note tomorrow, okay? But just think about the Last Supper, the first communion, and how important that is.